This is the PTI podcast.
Welcome along to this PTI vodcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Rob Mills, the CEO at Gemba. We're going to be talking about all things sponsorship on a global scale and how COVID is impacting it. And now that we're returning to sport, how rights holders and sponsors are seeing a realignment of their values and what's happening in the sponsorship space. So, Rob, just to start us off, welcome and thanks for joining. Could you just explain a little bit about yourself, your background, and your involvement in the industry?
Yeah, as you said, CEO and director of Gemba. Gemba's been running for about 15, 16 years now, focused on sport and entertainment industry, so providing a lot of strategy and insight work to the global sport and entertainment industry. And then more recently, my focus has been out of London launching Turnstile, which is our global sponsorship valuation proposition. So we've been working closely with the likes of Formula One, Manchester City, World Rugby, rolling that platform out since March 2018.
Great, and my name is Mike Bondy, the CEO at PTI, and we specialise in activating digital engagement across the sports and entertainment industry. So Rob, across your client base, what is the number one challenge being passed back to clubs and venues by their sponsors as a result of COVID at this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly been a very challenging time, and I'd probably preface it by saying I think the thing that's impressed us is how pragmatic and balanced both the brands, the sponsors and the rights holders have been through the period. I think everyone's looking for sort of realistic and amicable solutions and not looking to sort of exploit the situation. But I think, the key thing that everyone's trying to work through is how do you compensate for some lost value, with this massive disruption that the global sports industry's had. So a large sort of part of the work that we've been doing is to sort of try and help both brands and rights holders navigate that. And it sort of feels like there's sort of three main phases to that, which is, first of all, sort of get a baseline about what these deals are worth and a more sort of granular understanding of value. Then through a variety of different techniques, sort of work out ways of actually how that can be compensated and then actually executing that compensation. So at the moment, we're sort of quite deep in that process with probably 50% of brands and rights holders at the moment trying to sort of work through that conundrum.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of acceleration of digital assets and their use at this period of time. I guess a lot of venue-led activation and venue-led rights, even simple things like hospitality, venues being removed. Creates a value misalignment that people need to activate against, and digital's been playing a bit of a role there. I think one of the bigger challenges that we're seeing is where COVID has hit in the middle of a multi-year deal. So let's say 2020 has been year two of a 3-year deal, so you're already thinking about what you're going to be doing for renewal for next year. You're going to try and drive that additional value, and then right in the middle of that, you've ended up with a block where actually in some ways it's hard to catch up. What should be your guys' view of sort of the multi-year deal factor and where COVID has landed, for example, in the middle or towards the end of a multi-year deal?
Yeah, I think there's probably two main strategies that we're seeing that are being applied there. One being deferral and one being extension. And when we talk deferral, it's been sort of identifying the rights that can't be delivered straight away and almost warehousing those rights with a view that they may be delivered in subsequent years of the contract. Sometimes that's possible. Sometimes when you've got sort of finite resources like elite or top-end hospitality, for instance, that becomes a bit more problematic. But the deferral piece has been one really important strategy applied to sort of get through that multi-year challenge. And the second one, which has been an interesting one and probably one that surprises a little bit, was quite a few sponsors have been willing to extend their relationships to almost provide more runway to allow those rights to be delivered. So that's obviously given rights holders some continuity and some certainty going forward with their income streams. And in this environment, that's been highly valued. But it's also allowed the rights holder to say, okay, I may have another 1, 2 or 3 years to actually deliver the value that was missed in this period as well. So they've been sort of the two sort of main themes. And I think probably as an overarching one, just probably a fair degree of innovation, quite frankly, just different approaches and different techniques of delivering value that I think we can probably argue a lot of them we can take forward after COVID's sort of washed through the system as well.
Yeah, and I guess this is all obviously set against the backdrop of the financial challenge that the brands are experiencing as well. So I guess for the challenge is that the clubs and venues want to retain their sponsors at the right value because they're a key income stream for them. But for the brands themselves, their income streams may have been hugely affected. You know, you're sponsored by a car brand that hasn't been able to sell for a few months, or a hotel that's been closed for a few months, etc. There's a big challenge for that. So how have you guys been helping people and seeing the re-evaluation for them as to driving the right types of value, and how that digital transformation element of I used to be a box at a venue or a premium suite is now actually X number of social media posts or X number of promotions within our app, to help the sponsors actually financially recover themselves and create a genuine partnership exchange.
Yeah, look, that's been a lot of the work for the Turnstile team out of London the last few months is helping, so both brands and rights holders with that. And in some ways, it's almost become this sort of Uber use case for Turnstile, because we've always believed that you can value all those different components of contracts and you can be that granular. So what we've been able to do is actually say, well, look, these particular rights are worth X. And yes, if you bundle these up together, that does replace the lost value over here. So we've been doing a lot of that. The other thing we've had to our advantage, and more importantly, our clients' advantage, is the software that we leave our clients with also allows clients to model that. So we've got clients who are actually modeling the impact of not being able to deliver certain rights because of COVID. And then building a new package that says, okay, well, if I actually now roll these things in, does that offset the difference? So, you know, because there's so much nuance in this, and there's so many different components and moving parts. And also too, because the seasons necessarily haven't been confirmed, there's a lot of scenario modelling here. If the season starts on this date, what does it look like? If the season gets delayed another month, what does it look like? So the software that we leave our clients actually allows them to start doing that modelling in real time and actually providing that information straight back to their sponsorship partners.
And across your client base, what have been the best examples of realignment value that you've seen come to pass, where both sponsor and club kind of work together to find those examples and drive the right values for both parties, whilst realigning or changing the types of rights that they're receiving?
Yeah, look, I think some of the really interesting stuff yet sort of probably hasn't broken cover, and we can't talk about. There's a lot of sort of behind the scenes things happening because obviously, seasons are up and about to start getting up and running again, and events are sort of being scheduled. So I think there's some really interesting stuff that is yet to come that we are quite excited by. And again, I think some of those things will be able to actually take through in a post-COVID world. Look, it's been really varied. I mean, just simple things like not necessarily, super sexy things, but just providing a bit more flexibility on pass-through rights, for instance. So allowing maybe a sponsor to take some of the rights of the sponsorship and activate it with their retail partner and drive additional volume. And pass-through rights has always been a sort of an area of sensitivity in contracts. And I think there's been some really nice pragmatic solutions around pass-through rights. I've been really interested with just the whole esport piece. And again, while it hasn't replaced the total exposure lost by traditional sport, I think both the consumer but also the industry, perhaps more broadly, has embraced that. And if someone had told me that 3 months ago that we would have Formula One drivers, competing in an Australian supercar series because a sponsor had facilitated that, I would have said, "You're kidding." I mean, that to me is really interesting, and just some nice ideas too around sort of making athletes and coaches accessible to fans through environments like this. And again, you'd argue, well, why weren't we doing this before COVID? So, look, as I say, I think it's been really interesting to see how one's attacked it. And I've been very impressed with the industry, actually, about the innovation and some of the creativity that has come out of this period.
Yeah, I mean, there has been definitely an element of humanisation about through this, particularly for the athletes. I mean, it's great to see different types of athletes getting involved in different things. Obviously, the Formula One E-Series has been a big hit, and for me, whilst not the biggest Formula One fan, as an Arsenal fan and Arsenal season ticket holder, Aubameyang taking part in the virtual Grand Prix last week created more interest for me, but also helps to humanise Aubameyang in terms of Arsenal fans and being able to connect with him doing something that you can also do yourself in terms of the gaming at home kind of content that they were looking at, which has been which has been really interesting. And as we stand today, early June 2020, some sports are already back. The majority of sports are sort of phasing back over the next month or two as we start to go through. So what do we think the trends are going to be moving forward across this phase now that there's actually, I guess, some reality to sport returning? And as you say, the scenario planning of if we restart then or if we restart then, and the challenges of that start to fade away as we get slightly more certainty as to what sport looks like. What do you think we're going to start to see?
Yeah, look, I don't think we really know, to be really brutally honest. I think it's really interesting. We are talking a lot about this internally, and I think there's a danger as an industry that we maybe try and assume we do understand what this looks like. I mean, I think short term, as you'd expect, and we're seeing it, with the leagues that are starting up, we are seeing a spike in ratings and engagement. And I think as a consumers and fans, we're all sort of looking for some degree of normality to come back. So I can see why we all sort of are engaging with that content as it comes back on. I think what's interesting for me is when we get back in the rhythm of the season, there's not crowds, does that level of engagement continue? And that's probably a question rather than more than a statement, because I'm not too sure how that plays out. I think some of the things that our insights team are starting to report back to us, which I think as industry we really need to get our heads around, is we shouldn't be assuming that necessarily the fans are all going to come back like we'd like them to. I think there's a couple of factors there. There's an economic reality. So on the data that we're getting at the moment, sport, entertainment, live events are seen as discretionary. I think it's going to take a while for people to perhaps get the economic confidence to come back. And I think it's just the health reality as well. In our data, there's about 20% of consumers who are really concerned about the health implication of live events. And I think as the industry, we're going to have to be not only innovative, but very prescriptive and communicate how stadiums and venues become safe. Operationally, to me, I think it becomes interesting around social distancing in stadiums, public transport in the stadiums. How do we think about staggering crowds coming into stadiums? And on the positive side, what does that mean for dwell time? I mean, you can sort of see these scenarios where we're potentially going to have people having to come into stadiums earlier and stay later. So how do we entertain them? How do we engage with them digitally? What do those activation precincts look like? I think there are some opportunities that come out of that. There's a whole lot of things that I still think are probably unknown to the industry that we're going to be working through for at least 12 months, I suspect.
Yeah, I think a few of the things that we are seeing here and talking a lot about, the first one is disaggregation of sponsorship rights and the fact that for 2020, maybe 2021, or the seasonality of that from a UK perspective, you've got sponsors potentially wanting to drive down the amount they're spending because this is a global crisis from a financial point of view. This isn't just impacting sport, it's impacting wider industry. And some industries are up and actually benefiting from this, and some industries are down. And therefore, you're looking at, actually, we've currently got this thing wrapped up into a £500,000 sponsorship package, for example, but disaggregating that and selling it at 3 sets of £200,000 means we can engage people at a lower value, but actually drive a higher value for the club overall by breaking these rights down. There's a lot of thought going into that, because I think the hidden challenge that people aren't perceiving necessarily straight away at this moment in time is about the brand perception elements. A lot of the big brands, even if it is the big boys, and you look at airlines, I guess most predominantly, and the amount of job losses and redundancies that have happened there as major sponsors of quite a number of teams. Well, actually, they might not want the visibility right now. It's hard on the one hand to lay off a big percentage of your workforce or stand down a big percentage of your staff and then take on a stadium naming rights deal or a front of shirt sponsorship and say, we've got loads of money to advertise in sport, but not enough money to pay the staff. That's that strange sort of ethical blend that also comes across. So allowing people to keep the advertising rights and the marketing properties, but doing that in a subtle or a different way is definitely an impact that we're talking to a lot of people about. And as you say, then we use digital rights to disaggregate and help to create new assets that are going to be more appealing because they're just simply more targeted. And as a result, there's been a big move from our client bases into understanding the fan more and using this pause period where you're not having to sort of run between match days, and right, with another match day coming up Saturday, better sell some tickets, better get people in, better monetize them, better get some F&B spend, sell them some retail, move again. Type of piece to say, actually, we need to get to know the fans on a more granular basis so we can target them better with better marketing messages, which are going to drive better call to actions, better returns for our sponsors. And if we can really aggregate that, it's going to generate us a better return, a better engagement, and potentially better value for the sponsor, but do so in a more subtle way than your traditional sort of brand slap advertising, which they ethically want to avoid as part of their spend reduction. Have you guys seen much in terms of the disaggregation factor?
Not yet. I think it's a really interesting contention, because I can see that some parts of the industry may end up that way. I think that your point there around the sort of acceptability of advertising or sponsoring, I think, is a really interesting one. And I know if you think about sort of go back to the financial crisis, whether that was 12 years ago there, banks, for instance, it was a bit awkward and clunky, wasn't it, about these guys, doing big sponsorship, given what they were just going through. There is a counter argument. And in fact, one of our clients the other day was talking to us about this, around this thought that what this period has done, as perhaps opposed to the financial crisis, which was the last sort of big shock we've had, was it probably is building stronger sense of community out there. Community amongst, looking after our own little communities and our families, but also I think in some ways the sporting communities that a lot of fans are missing. And to me, and this particular sponsor is quite a big investor, was talking about the pivot for them really is talking about the benefit of sport and what it does to build communities and keep communities together. And hey, haven't we all missed this when it's gone away as well? So, it goes back a little bit more to perhaps a bit more traditional storytelling a little bit, and I don't like throwing that word around, but I think there is a sense of community out there that I think brands can talk to. I think picking up on your digital assets point, I agree. And I think there will be a lot of opportunities there. And I think, obviously, you and I have talked a lot about this in recent months, but I think that becomes very important too, about making sure that rights holders really understand the value of their digital assets, because, all the data we're seeing, they are high performing assets. They are not digital assets in the normal sort of ecosystem. They're digital assets in the context of passion and engagement. And the opportunity for rights holders is to correctly price those. And I think in this environment, I think a lot of the innovation that COVID's forced on us has sort of been almost led by digital assets, because it had to be, So I can see that a lot of that momentum does continue in that post-COVID period for digital assets related to sort of sports and entertainment properties.
That's great. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Rob, thanks for sharing your time and your insight with us. No,
pleasure. No, thank you for the time.
And if you'd like to find out more about PTI or Turnstile in the UK or the Geneva Group more widely, then head to ptidigitalgroup.com. Otherwise, we'll look forward to our next podcast coming out soon.